Hello and welcome to the EMS Handoff podcast. This is David, along with my co-host Bradley Dean and Eric McCullough. We are your source for all things EMS. Tonight, and we'll keep this term very loose because we've talked to a couple of attorneys in the past. We're going to see how he does and see if he tops those others here. But we have a very distinguished guest. I don't think anybody in this profession for any period of time is not going to recognize this name. But we've got a great topic and a great guest tonight. So we're going to jump right into that here in just a moment. But we're going to go ahead and start over on the East Coast with Bradley Dean coming from North Carolina. How are you doing this week?
Doing great. It's been a great week at work, and weather has been beautiful today.
It has. It started out cold, but it turned absolutely beautiful. I still want to know what the weather is around here. It was 70, and then 28 out of random nowhere. They're talking about freeze warnings. We can't. I mean, we're in the middle of April now. Can't be doing that. So we're going to go over to the other side. Eric McCullough, great giveaway this week. A lot of attention. So we'll see how that goes. But how's Eric McCullough doing?
Oh, we're doing good. Yeah, we got a lot of interest in those coins that we have out from Platinum. Everybody's been reaching out to us on the website via Facebook. I'm sure by the time this gets published, I'll still be collecting names and stuff because we got plenty of stuff to give away. So that's going to be awesome. It's been, the weather has been kind of crazy. I had the kids home from spring break this week, so that's been kind of nice to just kind of chill with them for a little bit. So yeah, other than that, it's not been too bad.
All right. Before we introduce the guest, we'd like to thank our podcast partner, the Journal of Emergency Medical Services. They've been a tremendous partner to the EMS Handoff podcast. And while we serve as your source for all things EMS in the podcast verse, Jim's has been an industry leader for many years. Go by their website, support their efforts to keep the industry informed, but also check out us, all of our prior episodes. Got a lot of good things, a lot of great episodes. So if you haven't seen those, make sure to go check them out. And also check out some of our others. You'll see AJ Hyman on there and a couple of other industry leaders that are just talking about EMS in general and trying to make sure and hand off their knowledge. And you see us all in our gear today. I've got the white on. Bradley's representing the red, and Eric McCullough hanging out in the black. Don't forget the EMS Handoff gear with our apparel partner, Pursue Outfitters. Make sure to check out the Pursue company at pursueoutfitters.com. And you can see our gear by itself at /EMS Handoff. We've got the shirts, long sleeve shirts, and hoodies there, even though we are getting into April. You never know when you're going to need that hoodie as you wake up and it's 28 degrees outside. Bradley, kick it off. Give us our next guest.
So tonight we're joined by Doug Wolfberg, who is a founding member of Page, Wolfberg Wirth. He's been a practicing EMS attorney for 25 years. He's a nationally respected EMS leader who's been involved in the profession for over 40 years. He served as an EMS practitioner, an EMS director at the county level, EMS administrator at the regional, state, and federal level over the course of his career. He's written countless articles on several books related to EMS legal issues, and he can tell you how to professionally chase ambulances. So he's been a featured presenter at virtually every national and state EMS conference in the country. He teaches EMS Law at the University of Pittsburgh and is also an adjunct faculty member at Widener University Commonwealth Law School. He's taught health law for 20 years, and in his spare time, he's a musician, a writer, and currently finishing a book about the Beatles. So he's also an avid bicyclist and an annual participant in the National EMS Memorial Bike Ride. So I'm going to turn it over. Doug, is there anything that I left out? Because, I mean, you have been doing this for a long time. I ran him off when I talked about chasing ambulances.
Oh, sorry. I'm here. No, I said you read it just like my mother wrote it. Thank you.
we luckily we didn't get off into too much of a rabbit hole. You expected to be like kicked offline. It's like, so welcome, Doug. And we're glad to have you on the show. And The one thing about it is mothers will always write the best things about their kids, so who better to write it for you? So again, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right. So as we started this, Bradley got in touch with you and said, hey, let's go through the top 5 legal issues that you see confronting EMS. And so you sent over a couple of great ones. And I really, I think this pretty much covers just about everything that you can possibly see. So let's go ahead and get started on that. Just out of curiosity, before we get into these 5, what makes these 5 topic areas that we're going to get into tonight the top issues that you kind of see about this profession?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's actually a little bit of an amalgamation here of different sources. There's some published literature that deals with the most prevalent kinds of lawsuits. So a few of the ones on the list are from that research. And then a couple of the ones are the ones that we spend most of our professional time dealing with. So it's a little bit of mix of data-driven and anecdotal here on our top 5. All
right. Well, let's go ahead and jump into number 1 then. You got number 1 listed. And I don't know, let me ask you this. Are these 5, the way you sent over, is that 1 through 5, or is these just the top 5 that you see?
Yeah, it was more a stream of consciousness, actually. But it is true that the first one on the list, which we haven't named yet, we're keeping people on the edges of their seats, does happen to be the one that generates the most litigation activity. So it is also at the top of the list empirically as well as anecdotally.
All right. So as we get ready to get onto that, we're going to go to our first commercial. No, just kidding. All right. So ambulance crashes. Let's just go ahead and toss it out there. Number 1, ambulance crashes. I don't think there's a day that goes by that you can't pull up on EMS1, GEMS, really any of the publications and not see something going on about collisions involving our crash or our ambulances. So let's go ahead and just kind of introduce that one specifically and see where that takes us.
Yeah, great. I mean, yeah, it is true that the way we drive has more of an impact on our liability than the way we provide care in terms of just number of lawsuits and dollars paid out by insurance companies on behalf of ambulance services. So it's the biggest area of liability easily in terms of number of suits and amount of dollars. And honestly, guys, I know there's been a lot of talk about this in the publications and the podcasts in recent years, but I think a lot of this is really the root cause is a lack of subscribing to evidence-based medicine, meaning that we're still buying into the red lights and siren and drive like hell and get there quick myth, that has been deflated time and time again in most research. There's still sad realities though. Many ambulance services answer to local government officials, local government agencies who still think the way to hold public accountable is to get there fast. As long as a pizza's hot, we don't care if it's any damn good. It's just make sure it's hot when you get there. And, that lack of acceptance and then still selling the public that bill of goods, about time being a proxy for quality in our profession is, I still think, one of the root causes, not the only, but one of the key root causes where we're still living and dying by response times in too many communities.
So that brings up a unique thing now, not talking about EMS in general, but the fact that you brought up pizza. This is taking me back to my childhood, but as a kid, I lived on a Marine Corps base, and there was a pizza establishment that is still out there today, but their motto was less than 30 minutes or it's free. And so anytime they would deliver, they were the world's worst for getting in accidents on the roadway. And the base that we lived on was a huge place for them, but we were basically on their 30-minute boundary, and they were pushing that time limit time and time again. And so they got in trouble on base multiple times with speeding and such. And ultimately, because of that, one day they ended up getting into an accident with the daughter of the installation's commander. And so they subsequently lost the ability to come on base at all, which hit their revenue. And so that really kind of ties back to this as well, that quickness actually does more to potentially prevent us from getting there because of the accidents and some other things. So, and people just seem to hear the lights and sirens behind them and just kind of freeze, and we're expecting them to do something and we don't, and they don't.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, that's just such a key part of it. And the other part, I think you just sort of almost introduced that topic. So, and that is the culture in our profession. We have to really look in the mirror and be, maybe this is too much controversy for the first 6 minutes of the episode tonight, but we have to really look in the mirror, and it starts with the culture of our organizations. And, I started in EMS in the, heaven forbid, late 70s. And, I think back, and it's one of the big attractions was, when do I get to play with the siren box, And, I was the king of figuring out all those cool modes you could get on the siren box if you were just in between the two settings, right in between wail and yelp. And if you hit the siren button at the same time, So part of that is the reinforcement of the culture, that we say these words and everybody goes home safe. But our actions don't really reinforce that being our priority, because that is by far the biggest risk area we put our people into. It's behind the wheel and it's in the moving vehicles. So if we really mean that, and if we really value safety as a culture, we've got to look at the data and be driven by, just like any intervention. If we pushed a drug that didn't work or that was found to be harmful, we'd take it out of the drug box. Why is the use of lights and sirens different than any other clinical intervention? If it doesn't help patients and it potentially causes harm, which it does both to our workforce and to the public, then why is it a practice that continues to be so widespread? It should be like any other clinical intervention, and we should QA the use of lights and sirens just like we should other interventions. And why did we do this? Okay, well, here were the extenuating circumstances, or here's why it fell into our protocol for a hot response. And otherwise, it should be relegated to the exception and not the rule.
Do you think though that because when most of the area, at least where I'm at here in Tennessee, priority dispatch is some dispatch places, it's automatically 911, no matter lights and sirens emergency, no matter what it is, stub tow, unless it's a transfer, everybody's going 911. So I'm wondering if just because they're dispatched that way, that maybe there's this culture of well, they're using it flippantly, we can too. We can turn it on and off just as by default, kind of the way dispatch does sometimes.
Yeah, well, that's another issue you just hit on, which is dispatch policy and dispatch protocols. Look, I mean, I think if we performed a practice in EMS and it caused harm to a patient, there's liability and there's malpractice and all that kind of stuff. On the dispatch side, not doing priority-based dispatch, not doing EMD, not having standardized protocols, and just pushing the hot button on every single response, is inviting that liability. And there are dispatch liability cases, and agencies that think they're saving money by not implementing priority dispatch, not training dispatchers and telecommunicators as EMDs, ultimately that is penny wise and pound foolish, because the exposure on the part of the dispatch agencies is just like if we hurt somebody, out in the field. There are plenty of cases on that side of it as well. But you're absolutely right. Look, a lot of these agencies, they don't have the benefit of information about which responses may be critical and which may not be. And that's a failure on another part of the system. But look, if we turned the lights and sirens off on all responses and went cold, there wouldn't be any measurable worse outcome among our you know what I mean? So the data are pretty clear about that. If we get there, we find a true emergency, however many minutes, and in a rural area, that's not going to be very pronounced, because it's not like you're dealing with traffic jams, and it's not like you're dealing with crowded intersections, and it's not like you're dealing with, pedestrians and crosswalks everywhere, so the time differential in a rural area is going to be even less pronounced. And if it's a minute that you save or two, what is clinically significant with that additional time that it's going to make a difference in the outcome of the patient? Almost nothing. Okay, cardiac arrest, stroke, STEMI, I can rattle off the ones that are time sensitive, but it's not the speed of the ambulance that's going to determine the outcome. It's going to be, is there a bystander on scene doing CPR? Did somebody have an AED there? And then did we make the right call and get them right to a STEMI center, get them right into a cath lab? And, it's not necessarily the delta on the ambulance response that's going to be the most determinative on the outcomes.
So I kind of want to get into the legal side of this, because one of the things that we have to talk about, and it's one of the common questions that we have as a provider initially comes into the first line EMS or EMT education is, once we get into operations, we're talking about how fast can we drive the ambulance. And that, I ask the question, especially those that have been around others like fire, law enforcement, et cetera. And, I know what the state of Tennessee's codes actually state, but so let me ask you this question, like it's asked to us consistently. How fast can you operate an ambulance?
Well, I'm going to give you the BS lawyer answer of the day, and that is that it depends. And what it depends on is state law, because this is an area that's regulated by the states, not by the federal government. So there's no national standard for it. In the state I happen to be sitting in right now, which is Pennsylvania, every other type of emergency vehicle, police, fire, has a legal privilege to disregard speed limits. Ambulances don't. So there are variances in state law. I don't know of any state, though, where you can drive the vehicle faster than is reasonable under the conditions. And, that's the legal phrase we always come back to in negligence and in liability and everything else. And that's reasonableness. There's always an inherent duty, regardless of the intricacies and the differences of state law, to drive with a due regard to the safety of others. And that means it's reasonable to anticipate that if I'm coming into an intersection that's a controlled intersection and my light's red, well, it's reasonable to assume somebody could be in the intersection on a green light. And even though I may have a legal privilege etched into my state law that says I can proceed through a red light, it's not reasonable care to do so without ensuring I have the right of way, right? So, those statutory privileges are dialed in some states, but nowhere do you have a license to act unreasonably, that famous tort word that we all live with.
Well, you kind of said, in fact, if you were looking at my sheet here where I take my notes, that's almost the exact quote that I have at the top, because in TCA it says with due regard for safety. And so my question to everybody is, if you're on the interstate and it's pouring the rain like we had this past weekend and you're going 10 miles over the speed limit, are you operating with due regard for safety? And everybody's like, oh, you can do 10 miles over. I say, well, what if you get in an accident? And then, the question is, did you operate with that regard for safety? And the answer is no. I said, what if you're doing 10 miles under the speed limit when there's ice outside and you get in a wreck? So that's a great way that you explain it there, because we have to think, going back to what you said a moment ago, that response time, or that change in response time by speeding up just a little bit. If we're going within most of our communities, a change of 3 or 5 or even up to 10 miles an hour, we're talking seconds gained, not minutes or tens of minutes or half an hour worth, unless we're going an extremely long time. So we have to be able to get there, and we have to be able to get back to the hospital. So
that's exactly right.
So let me ask you this. Why, I'm kind of thinking that most of why we turn on the lights and sirens is a perception issue. Like, if we don't have those lights and sirens on, the public doesn't think that we're actually doing everything we can to get there. And so that may be where we need to kind of change this concept to put that thought in the background, yes, we have the lights, but we need to get there. And then couple that maybe with a public education campaign to say, even without the lights and sirens, they're coming to you and they're trying to do it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, hallelujah. You just you said something almost verbatim from the way I wrote it in an article that was in GEMS some years back about this issue. And I don't know how much longer you want to spend on this one, but I do want to just share one quick thought, and that is, you hit the perception nail right on the head. Great, so well stated. And I have to tell you, how would public perceptions differ if instead of showing up in an ambulance with red lights on the roof and siren boxes on the vehicle, and hopping out and looking like public safety professionals, police officer or firefighter or whatever in uniform, how would public perceptions differ if we pulled up in an unmarked white minivan, hopped out with a stethoscope around our neck and a white smock on, and no lights, no sirens, and we walked up to the front door? They would say, wow, a doctor got here and it only took 45 minutes, right? But when you show up in an ambulance with lights and sirens and the whole public safety, flying circus, it was 8 minutes. What the hell took you so, because the perception is colored by the way we respond, by the mode we respond. And you're right, the public expects it, the public demands it. Right now, the public's, perception is such that they don't think we're taking it seriously if we didn't show up with lights and sirens and we didn't drive fast and all those other things. But I just like to think about that perception. If we showed up appearing like a healthcare service and not like an emergency service, the public's perception would change eventually. That wow, they got healthcare at their door, in less than an hour. That would turn perceptions on their heads.
All right. So the key. Go ahead, Bradley.
Oh, sorry. I was going to jump in, but I didn't realize I was off mute yet. I just want to get this straight, because hopefully some of the people from my peer review committee are listening to this. So basically what you're saying, and I don't want to twist your words, is response times is not a good quality measure. The care given is.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And again, I just went on times. I'm not saying time doesn't matter. There are cases where it does, but the research has shown if I get a STEMI patient to a STEMI center in 45 minutes, they're going to have better outcomes. If the ambulance took 18 minutes to get there, as long as I made the right call when I interpreted the EKG and got the patient to the correct destination, I'm still going to optimize their outcome. It's not that the ambulance had to get there in 8 minutes. It's that I had to make the right call and get them to the right definitive care the first time. So, time matters, but not so much the response time piece as people think it does.
Yeah,
all right.
I'm just going to say, and the reason I point that out is in 2017, late 2017, maybe early 18, I handed out a paper that was written by Doug Wolfberg, Lights and Siren Use by EMS, Above All Do No Harm, to our peer review. I made 18 copies and handed out probably 16 of those. When I left, 12 were in the trash can.
Oh, goodness. Well, Doug is our state medical director here in Pennsylvania. In fact, I've known him since he was a resident in just out of medical school. But and I was very pleased to be cited in that some of my published stuff. But yeah, that's a great piece that he wrote. And in fact, Bradley, in that piece, in that report, which he did under contract for NHTSA, they articulated standards that we should be responding less than 50% of the time with lights and sirens and transporting less than 5% of the time. So there are national benchmarks in that CUPAS report that really give us good objective metrics to shoot for in terms of QAing, as I said earlier, the use of lights and sirens as a clinical intervention. So I'm glad you mentioned that report. Glad you got a plug in for our state medical director here in PA. And it's a great document. I'm sorry to hear that it was disregarded the way you described.
All right, we're gonna go off this. The key thing is, as Doug is saying, we need to get there, make the right decisions, and move on to the hospital. And so the middle part to that is where we're going to get in next, actually talking about clinical management and medical malpractice. So what is the topic, or what is it that you see the most with this topic area, Doug?
Well, I'd say this really breaks down into a couple of subcategories, but patient handling, it really could sort of go under this general heading. Patient handling errors, dropping patients, and sometimes it's human, sometimes it's device malfunction. Those are on the list. Orthopedic cases, cardiac and airway cases. And the interesting thing particularly about those is that if you put 100 emergency physicians in a room, well, find another room. But if you put 100 emergency physicians in a room, you're probably going to get about 105 different, just kidding. Some of my best friends are emergency physicians, but you're going to get about 105 different opinions about, standards of care on some of these questions. Right. And, that's fine. We can have those micro differences about, intubation and all that kind of stuff. But some of the cases that have crossed our threshold in the last few years are just incredible cases where, there's one out of Maryland where two paramedic crew had a patient who, the 911 call was chest pain. The wife said, I think he's having a heart attack. They get there, what's the problem? It hurts here. He's grabbing his chest. And upon, doing an interview for history, they find out he had a spicy chicken sandwich and some Hawaiian punch. And they said, oh, it's just GI, and they walked him to the ambulance and they didn't even put oxygen on. And, just kind of confounding things like that, where honestly, even though I wasn't involved in that case as a lawyer or as an expert witness, I just read about it like anybody else could read about it. But you read these cases and you think, man, this is just a case study in burnout. Whether these are high volume systems or high volume providers who just see stuff day in, day out, and they get jaded and they get complacent about it. And it's just amazing. And I think that human aspect of it has really crept up. And, and when you see this case get reported and it gets brought to court and it goes to trial and goes to verdict and it goes on appeal, when I read these cases, it makes me wonder, is this the first time that these medics involved in these kinds of cases have exhibited this kind of disregard or this kind of complacency or this kind of lack of empathy? Did not somebody down the line in the years that these folks were working at this agency notice similar concerning behavior and let it slide because retention has always been such an issue? And hallelujah, if we have somebody with a pulse and a patch, it's just, if that's our standard, we're just inviting clinical liability.
I'm going to make it, because I believe you hit it right on the head there at the very end. One of the things that you're talking about is, is it the first time? And I know the answer to that is usually no. And what's interesting is once something happens, a number of individuals will go, yeah, I saw that and I just thought it was something. And one of the things from the education side is we take a look at this. We see some of those students going out and they get this, hey, that's not the way it's done in the field. But maybe it's not done in the field the way that it's not supposed to be done. And so, we have to be willing to speak up and be willing to say, hey, we need to do this first. And this may be it, this may not be it. But until we know for sure, we can't rule anything in or out.
Yeah, well said.
Do you also think that there's a shift work that plays a deal in that? Like, and I'm not saying that there's an excuse for malpractice. There isn't, or abuse of the standards, regardless of what they are. But do you think and there's always going to be extenuating circumstances. I get that part. But as a lot of services maybe have those 24-hour shifts and they are getting slammed. And to me, you're almost expediting the burnout because of the amount of hours you're working, the number of calls you're doing. So it's easier to, like, I guess, kind of slip into that pattern of malfeasance and bad behavior until finally you are busted at one point whenever your laziness kind of catches up to you. Or have you, I'm sure you come across that before in your years of experience.
Yeah, in fact, there's data that show that, like, for example, the incidence of patient refusals of so-called refusals of transport go up at shift change, right? So yeah, there are data that link shift work to clinical quality issues or deficiencies, I should say. So yeah, and longer shifts are well documented to have a correlation to medical malpractice. In fact, I'm blanking on the name of the organization right now, but the organization that handles oversees graduate medical education in the United States that also deals with medical residents, they have eliminated from their standards shifts longer than 24 hours, which of course any physician will tell you was the medical school rite of passage, right? 48-hour shifts, 72-hour shifts. But the incidence of errors in medical judgment are well documented for shift lengths in excess of 24 hours. So, and not only that, but a very related issue is, all right, fine, even if we limit our shifts to 24 hours, what's our organization's moonlighting policy? And that's a difficult issue to address from a retention standpoint, because we don't want to, if our organization prohibits people from working at other jobs, that's less attractive to come work here. But, can we say you have to have a minimum of 12 hours in between 24-hour shifts if you're moonlighting for another agency? Sure, we can, we can't mandate you went home and went to sleep, but we can at least take reasonable steps as an organization to safeguard our patients by saying, if you're coming right off of another shift at another agency, we're not going to put you on the schedule. So there are things we can do. And I don't want to minimize the impact of recruitment and retention, because that's always a challenge for our profession. But we can't be putting people out there in a situation where we know that they're more prone to cause harm, not intentionally, of course, but just by negligence, just by oversight, by being tired and being worn out. So yeah, there are things we can do to minimize those, at least reduce the potential. That's not going to eliminate medical error, but it can certainly reduce one of the root causes of it.
And also kind of hits our first topic as well, the number of accidents that are based in just individuals falling asleep behind the wheel as well. Let's go ahead and go into one of the things that you were talking about in response to Eric there as well. And really, I know on the initial education side, when I talk about this, I say that this area of documentation is almost more important than any other documentation that we do. But let's talk about those situations in which we make the decision to not treat or not transport the patients. So what do you see legally when we're dealing with those that we either refuse treatment or refuse transport?
Well, we could do the whole hour on this. This is one of my hot button areas. And, I think in EMS, all too often, we see the objective on a refusal or non-transport or non-treat situation is get our refusal form signed, right? That we're protected if we get the signature. I can tell you that as an attorney and having been a provider, I would much rather have a defendant in a lawsuit that has a thorough, well-written, well-documented narrative than that just has a signature, right? Because there's well-documented EMS lawsuits where court after court has thrown out the signature form, invalidated the waiver that the patient or the family member signed, because there was evidence that the crew didn't explain what it was the person was signing. We just need this signature to get out of your face. Oh, this is the signature that makes you go away. Great. They don't know that in many cases as lay people that refusing the treatment we're recommending or the transport, can have serious permanent effects on their health or even cause death. It's our job to say that to them, to be an advocate. and then to document that we did all those things. What were the alternatives that we told them? And have that collaborative discussion with the patient. Why is it they don't want to go to the hospital? Oh, I can't be late for work. Hey, we'll call your employer, right? I mean, there are things we can do to help neutralize those objections, I'm sorry. And to be able to say we did that and then to document that we did that, that's the protection in these non-treat, non-transport situations. It's not the signature. So, I mean, the very first thing I would say is that your protection comes from having a discussion with the patient or the legal decision maker, whoever that is, if it's not the patient, being an advocate and documenting all of that. Get the signature. I mean, that's icing on the cake, but it's the thorough narrative about that whole interaction where the protection comes for the EMS practitioner. So, I mean, that's the first thing I would say about non-transport situations or non-treat situations.
So,
sorry. Can I ask this real quick, David?
Yeah, go ahead.
What do you think about? I've heard of agencies that are using recordings or whatever, either verbal recordings of saying, repeat back, what I just told you. Does that hold up very well in court? Have you heard or have you seen anything like that?
Yeah, there's not a lot of cases that have been reported that actually go to verdict where that is one of the issues in the case. But I mean, I can tell you, I think that evidence is always compelling. So assuming that video evidence shows that the practitioners advocated for their patients, followed their protocols, and met the standard of care in a non-treat, non-transport situation, I'm all for the video, but it can also jump up and bite you in the ass if you didn't do those things.
So with this, I kind of take a look at the fact that a lot of what we're saying is, hey, you need to make sure have a good assessment and inform the patient whenever something's going on. But we're also not flipping this completely on the other side that says, hey, just because there's legal liability right here, if you don't do this right, everybody needs to go to the hospital. Just make everybody go. The idea, though, is we need to do that good assessment, find out what's going on, educate the patient as to the problem. And it doesn't look, your injuries are potentially up to and including death. Give it to them real and let them know what's going on, and then document that entire process and how you went about that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And what you said about the opposite of that is equally true. And that is that, there are cases, and this is becoming more of a predominant mode of service, right? When we have treat in place, when we have ET3, the new CMS pilot project, we have more and more systems implementing protocols, telehealth. I mean, so there's a whole new range of modalities, right? And look, a lot of times this is baked into every 911 system in the world. And that is, we're going to get there and find out a person who's not acutely ill or injured, who really doesn't need emergency medical services and is going to be just fine with other treatments or social services interactions or substance abuse counseling or whatever that is. So there are going to be times when we get there and find that, there's no need for our services. So there's nothing in the standard of care that says treat and transport patients who don't need treated and transported. The example I always give in response to what you just said, David, was, you have the 16-year-old kid who's in the minor bumper, fender bender, and there's, no broken glass, no intrusion in the passenger compartment, no leaking fluids, no visible mechanism of injury apparent in the vehicles involved. And, crews will say to me, well, but, there's a 16-year-old, they can't refuse, so I have to take them. And then I say, well, flip to the page in your protocol book that says you have to transport a person who doesn't need medical attention, right? So, we have to remember that we're being judged by the standard of reasonableness, and it's simply not reasonable to stick everybody on a stretcher and transport them to an emergency department when in many cases they don't need that. So yeah, you can absolutely go in the opposite direction with that.
All right. So we've had on previous guests that have gone into subsequent detail about documentation, specifically about, how to make sure it's correct and how and what really kind of gets into the reimbursement side of things when it comes to documentation. It really kind of made it interesting fun, but we're going to talk about the areas of documentation that will typically get us in trouble. So what do you see, Doug, when it comes to documentation? And ultimately, what happens when that piece of paper goes into the courtroom?
Yeah. Well, I think the areas that get us into trouble are the ones where we have a roadmap and, the trail of breadcrumbs goes cold. Boy, talk about mixing your metaphor, cold breadcrumbs. Anyway, what I mean by that is think about how many areas of care now are based on, established protocols. I think more so, than we had in past decades, right? And that is the roadmap for the plaintiff's lawyer, right? Because that's the A to Z sequential chronological steps for care of this condition. And when I have documentation that either A, makes it clear that I didn't follow the protocol in those steps, so there was protocol deviation without any documented justification for it, or B, I made just what in the law we call conclusory remarks, which is, trust me, I did everything I was supposed to, care per protocol, right? You might as well just say, I am a lazy ass EMT or a medic, and please believe me when I tell you I did everything I was supposed to do, right? So obviously documenting that you did A, B, C, D, E, and F is better than saying, yeah, I did those things, right? Trust me. So those are areas where, there's a roadmap and our documentation makes it clear that we took shortcuts to get from point A to point B.
So as I again go into the classroom, I talk a lot. And I know there's been a couple of cases, and one of them that I typically use, there was an 8-year-old, I believe in Chicago, in which the patient was intubated at some point in time. The kid ended up passing away, and the question was, where did the esophageal intubation actually occur? And there was a fight. The emergency department said that they received the patient as an esophagally intubated patient. The EMS crew said no. We had witnessed it passing the vocal cords. We had all the things that we normally confirm, but the documentation basically left that blank. And so we need to make sure that as all of this stuff occurs, it is what guides, as you kind of said, the playbook. It is what guides us or those in the hospital or in the legal side with what we actually did and what we did not. So making sure that each of those modalities that we use, whether it's an intubation, this is how I confirmed, this is when I confirmed subsequently, this is how I handed off the patient and the conditions they were in are all keys.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think the ultimate standard is, everybody said, well, what's the standard? Is it gross negligence? And what's the difference between gross negligence and ordinary negligence? And, because don't we have something like Good Samaritan protect, right? And they get all tangled up in that stuff. At the end of the day, it's, is the jury is there going to be an expert witness out there who's going to credibly stand in front of or sit in front of the jury and say, well, yeah, they should have done X, Y, and Z. And according to this, they didn't. Right. And so that is really at the end of the day, the standard is they're going to be a credible professional. I always use the word credible because they say, we know what they call the world's oldest profession, right? Well, being an expert witness is the world's second oldest profession, right? So they're very similar to the first profession. So, they'll say things for money, right? But if they're a credible expert, an EMS educator, an emergency physician, people who are in those lines of work, they're going to resonate with the jury. And if one of those credible experts is going to say you dropped the ball or cut corners, that's ultimately the standard you're going to be judged by. I can stick an expert up there, for the defense that'll say, oh yeah, well, I don't think they meant to kill the patient. But, once you're in the realm of, trust us, it wasn't intentional. The other side has pretty much made its point. And that at the end of the day is the standard, is a credible expert witness gonna cash your check to say something was missed.
I had the opportunity to review a deposition well after the case was over, and the attorney having the paramedic in there, and one of the commentary was every time the patient or the provider started to talk about the exhaled carbon dioxide, she'd refer to exhaled carbon monoxide. And ultimately, it was something like that right there, that after the fifth time that they did that, the plaintiff's attorney stopped her and goes, you've used this term multiple times. Do you know the difference between carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide? And that right there. So as you were mentioning, that lack of credibility in that provider would ultimately lead open that case. So our documentation needs to make it clear that we know what we're doing, and we've assessed and provided the care that is necessary, and looked at the assessments pre-treatment and post-treatment and made sure that it's correct. Now, I do want to get into that just a little bit deeper, because a lot of people simply look at that document as a billing sheet, and that we need to make sure that everything is right to make sure it's billed. And so we don't want to put in any extraneous information, because if we accidentally say something that's contradictory to one of our drop-down boxes earlier, a set of vital signs or a assessment, a patient was pink, warm, and dry, and down below that you mentioned they were pale. And so that differentiates there. And so they kick it back from the billing side. And so we have to make sure that the document is accurate for billing, because that's one component, but also care.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll talk about that connection to billing here in a second, but there's one other piece that goes back to what you said here at the beginning of that. And that is, I look at this, when you go into court on a clinical patient care issue, it's a credibility game, and our credibility is our currency, right? So we walk in with our pockets full of currency, because right off the bat, we have a job that society values and respects. We're seen as a noble profession, as we should be, and we walk in with that credibility. And then we take out those dollar bills and we hand them out. We give them away when we use the wrong terminology and we're called out on it, or when we didn't know the difference between a tibia and a cranium. You thought I was going to say fibula. And we use, terminology. We throw around, 25-cent words when we should just say leg, if we're not sure of what it is we're saying. We don't know the difference between carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide. And I was watching a trial on TV the other day, the one I'm sure everybody else has been watching this week, where one of the EMS providers on the stand was asked what an AED was. Oh, it's an automatic, so you knew right off the bat that was the wrong answer. It's something, it's a heart starter. And I thought, okay, well, that good recovery, but it's sort of a basic credibility with the public to be able to say it's an automated external defibrillator or whatever. Another provider was being asked about agonal respiration. Well, I don't know what it is, but it's what you do before you die. And to me, that just seemed like some of the lack of basics. And I'm not trying to call out those providers. Talk about the most stressful situation you could be in, but my point is fundamentals on anatomy, physiology, terminology. If we keep saying we want a seat at the healthcare table, act like healthcare professionals. And that's just the bottom line. If we act like technicians, that's how we're going to be perceived.
Very, very valid. So let's go ahead and go into that last spot, which I believe you were referring to there as well. So going into the billing side, or really there's multiple areas, but we get into fraud and abuse.
Yeah, so this is an area where we spend a lot of our professional time at the firm at PWW, sadly, because there are a lot of ambulance services, public, private, nonprofit, fire-based, hospital-based. It does not matter. The government goes after all shapes and sizes. And, there is this, sadly, a disconnect between clinical documentation in the field and the documentation in the billing office. And, too many providers labor under the belief that they have to turn in a PCR that's billable, right? Well, guess what, folks? We all know this. Not everybody who calls 911 galloping shock needed an ambulance. So it's not my job to turn that incident, that interaction, into a trip that meets Medicare's medical necessity standards. What happened? Oh, well, we responded to chest pain, arrived on scene, and found the patient standing at the end of their driveway with their suitcase in their hand saying, "Thanks for getting here so quick because I have a 2:30 appointment," right? Why'd you say chest pain? Well, because we knew you'd get here quick, So there's nothing I'm going to be able to do to turn that into a medically necessary transport. And it's not my job to do that. My job is to document what I saw and what I did. Arrived on scene, found, 78-year-old male patient standing at the end of driveway with suitcase in his hand. I don't have to work in personal judgments. Boy, this guy didn't need an ambulance, or what a bogus call that was. But I just want to factually say what I encountered. Interviewed patient claimed he had no illness, no injury, no pain, no discomfort, admitted that he told the dispatcher that he had chest pain to get a quick response. Patient asked if he could sit in the jump seat, vital signs within normal limits, right? Now, if I turn that into the billing office, they're not going to have a billable trip, at least not to the insurer, not to Medicare. But they're going to know when they read that without any judgment, without any drama, without any personal bias or opinion, that the medic or the EMT was communicating to that billing office that this was not a medically necessary transport. Please bill the patient. And the billing office at least knows that because the PCR was complete and accurate enough to make that determination. So there's a disconnect in that the sense that EMTs and paramedics often think their job is to write a PCR that the billing office can bill. And in some companies, sadly, that is the pressure that's put on the practitioners. But, that's why we call it fraud and abuse. The job is to write an accurate description of what the incident was all about and the patient's condition and the treatment, the transport, the handoff. And if we do that accurately and thoroughly, factually, the billing office is going to make the correct determination, assuming they have their training on what medical necessity means. And look, there's just non-covered services are baked into the cake, and it's the companies that try to turn every single one into a billable transport when we all know that there's no such thing as 100% billable EMS agency. That's when we run into trouble.
So really, before we get into our wrap up here tonight, I think one of the things that we can kind of see and really in your responses tonight, you almost said it the best at the last one here, but really every single one of these that we can go back to one common thread, and that's if we want to be a member of the healthcare community, we step up from our ambulance crashes, making sure that we are actually doing what we need to get to the patient and back. That's a judgment to say, hey, slow down. We need to do this better. The clinical management and medical malpractice is making sure that we have the most up-to-date knowledge and practice on the skills that we do to make sure we're making the right decisions, and documentation from our assessment. So every single one of those is really that. So upping our game as healthcare practitioners will potentially help alleviate every single one of these.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So if you decide to use that in any of your future articles, make sure and no, just kidding.
We'll send those nickels your way.
Okay, yeah, right there. Just go ahead and bring them on over. So Doug, we're going to give you just a couple minutes to kind of wrap up your thoughts about where we are and how we can get out of the common legal things that you see in this profession. So give us your last thoughts tonight.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know if I could say it much better than you just did, actually. And that is, to pull up that chair to the healthcare table. We used to debate whether EMS was public safety or public health. The time for that debate is long gone. I mean, we're a healthcare service. And I just, I know what the issue is between EMS and nursing. I get it. I've been in EMS a long time. But look what nursing did as a profession. Look how they raised the educational standards. Look how they raised compensation. Look how they raised prestige and perceptions of their profession just in the last 30, 40 years. You don't see, too many diploma RNs around anymore. They're BSNs, they're MSNs, they're nurse practitioners. I mean, not to say we all have to go be nurses, but what I'm saying is they made educational soundness and advancement of education, fundamentals in healthcare delivery. They retooled, repurposed their profession. And that's not a roadmap to go become nurses. It's a roadmap on how we can better professionalize EMS. And that's just a variation of the theme that you just said, David, but I would just take a page from that book and say hallelujah to you.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And we'll turn it over to Bradley for his last thoughts for the evening as well.
So I would say, and I hope that a lot of EMS administrators will take these 5 things that we've talked about tonight and make sure that they look at and they examine their agency and pretty much go through them, really with looking at ambulance crashes and at-risk behaviors with people, because we know that's where our legal liability lies.
Excellent. And Eric, how about you?
Yeah, my thing is go beyond the few pages that you have in your legal chapter on your EMS in your EMS textbook. I think legal is just kind of covered at the very beginning of EMT, AMT, kind of glossed over, maybe a little bit more into paramedic, but it is integral part of our profession. And like Doug was saying, retooling our profession also means that we need to understand the ins and outs of it better, and that includes all the laws, not just what we're not responsible for, we're responsible for, but also the stuff that's kind of outside our responsibility.
All right. Well, Doug, we certainly appreciate you taking the hour out of your day to talk about these 5 key issues that you see come across either through the papers you receive or just through your office as well. I think this is going to be a tremendous asset to those both the EMS providers out there, because this right here is something that really can come from the ground up. It doesn't necessarily need to go from the administrator side down. This is coming from the ground up. We make the grassroots level decision to say we want to make this profession better. We're going to take that into account. We may have the lights and sirens on, but we've made the decision to slow down just a little bit. We're going to take it easy with our patients, make the right decisions, and take them on. So all very valuable and is applicable to all levels, the provider, the administrator at the local, state, federal level. It's all in continuance. So, sir, thank you for taking that time out and helping the next generation of provider.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
All right. And as we always end every week, we like to say thank you for jumping on our shows and letting us provide some of that knowledge to each one of you, like Doug has provided today. But without each one of you, we're not sure exactly what you would like to hear. So make sure to reach out to us through our website at www.emshandoff.com. You can also see us on Facebook under the same title as well. You can find us on Instagram, now on LinkedIn as well. Just many different ways to let us know. So make sure and go to each one of those locations. Let us know what you think and check out what kind of giveaway that Eric's got going on this week as well. So from me and from my co-host Bradley and Eric, we would like to say take care, stay safe, and always remember the value of your EMS handoff.